Genesis 48, where we left off last week was when Jacob had met up with Pharaoh. Pharaoh had given them the land of Goshen. Jacob blesses Pharaoh. And then in the ending part of chapter 47, Jacob was talking to Joseph, and then he made Joseph promise that he will take his bones back to the promised land. That was where we left off, and then he sat down and he fell asleep. And that it doesn't mean that he died. He was just resting. Now in chapter 48 gives us a better picture of why Jacob looked so feeble. All right. So in chapter 48 it begins, and it came to pass after these things. That is after chapter 47. We don't know how long after chapter 47, but it would not be too long thereafter. Joseph was informed that indeed your father is sick. Now, I want to point out to you that the word sick in the English, when we look at the word sick, and sometimes when people tell you, oh, your father is sick, the Hebrew word for sick, or this in this case, chala, is weak, has become weak. Now, you can become weak from illness. You can become weak from having a disease. You can become weak because you're old. And so when you read the word sick, in this case, I do not believe that Jacob was sick and down with an illness. I believe that Jacob was very much old and has become weak. And so the word sick does not mean sick with illness. I think you get the same picture when you read James chapter 5, that a brother is weak, not sick. And the Greek also has a similar concept. So do not jump to conclusion whenever you see the word sick to mean sick with illness, but to be weak. And that is how Jacob is at this point in time. He's very old. And so when Joseph was told this, he brought his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And remember, these two sons were born to Joseph when he was in Egypt. And he was already given the prominence in Egypt by Pharaoh. Verse 2, Jacob was told as Joseph came, says, your son Joseph is coming to you. And so Israel strengthened himself. So this is the opposite of weak. And this word is to strengthen. Now, what does it mean by strengthen? It is very much to stand up, right? To show some strength. Which means that instead of lying down, he would have sat up on the bed. And so that's what he did, sat up on the bed. So Joseph came, and it gives Jacob the encouragement that no, this son that he loved has come to see him. So understand this, Jacob is not sick, Jacob is weak from old age. And when Joseph came, he got some strength and sat up on the bed. So you can see that, right? He sat up on the bed. Verse 3, then Joseph said to Jacob, God Almighty. Who is God Almighty? El Shaddai. Always remember that. El Shaddai. Shaddai appeared to me in Luz, in the land of Canaan and blessed me. Now, this episode happened in Genesis, let me put it here, Genesis 35 and verse 6. So God came to speak to Jacob in Luz, in the land of Canaan. And where is Luz? Luz is an old name for Bethel, the house of God. That's what it means. In the land of Canaan, and God blessed Jacob. He says to me, behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you, meaning your descendants will be more and more people. So the multitude of people, and give this land, and that's Canaan, to your descendants after you as an everlasting possession, that they will come and inherit the land thereafter. Verse 5. And now your two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who were born to you in the land of Egypt. Remember, the word Egypt is not Egypt. Egypt is a modern English word. This is Mitzrayim. As the old word, ancient word for Egypt, right? Before I came to you in Egypt are mine. Just as Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine. Now understand this. This is an important concept at this point in time. Ephraim and Manasseh, in verse 5, means that the two sons now become sons like Reuben and Simeon of Jacob, which now means that this is what he explained. Your offspring to whom you beget after them shall be yours, and they will be called by the name of their brothers in their inheritance. This is important to note that at this point in time, Jacob is telling Joseph, now Joseph, your two sons will represent you in the inheritance. But your two sons represent you in the inheritance because Jacob is now, well, for lack of a better word, adopting or taking in Ephraim and Manasseh as one of his 12 sons. That makes it 14. But the inheritance is given to 12. And so Joseph is never remarked as inheriting. It will be Ephraim and Manasseh representing Joseph. The other tribe that doesn't get any inheritance will be Levi or Levi. So from 14 sons, 2 will not get inheritance. Joseph represented by Manasseh and Ephraim, and Levi or Levi will not have, and hence the 12 portions of inheritance is intact. Now, I'm pretty sure that Jacob didn't know what's going to happen in the future when they become a nation of priests, that God has set aside the tribe of Levi to be serving God and will not inherit. And so at this point in time, as we look back, we now have 14 sons of Jacob. Okay. Carrying on, verse 7. But as for me, I came from Padan Aram, which would be in the Aramean country of north of Canaan, north of Lebanon, and that would be in today northern Iraq. And that would be the Aramean nation where the Assyrians were born, the Babylonians came, right? They are all Aramean. And so Why is that place so important? If you remember in the earlier parts of Genesis chapter 12 to 30, you would find that Isaac, it begins with Abraham. He left Ur, went to Haran, which is also called Padan Aram at this point in time. And when Abraham left Haran, he left Tarach as well as his other brothers and family there. And so Abraham came down to a land where God showed him, which is Canaan, and God and Abraham brought Lot with him. And whenever they were looking for a wife for Isaac, sent Eliezer back to Padan, and thereby they found Rebekah. And then when Jacob was looking for a wife, he also went back to Padan, and there he had Leah as well as Rachel. And so this is a recollection, verse 7. But as for me, Jacob, when I came from Padan, Rachel died beside me in the land of Canaan on the way before he arrived in Hebron. Rachel died during childbirth of the youngest son, Benjamin, right? But there was a little distance to go to Ephrath. Ephrath is also known as Ephratah, and that would be Bethlehem. Bethlehem is the house of bread, which in the English we pronounce it as Bethlehem. Now that is a recollection of Jacob, and also to be known of how God has blessed Jacob. Now when Jacob saw Joseph's sons, he says, "Who are these?" And Joseph said to his father, "These are my sons, whom God has given me in this place," that would be in Mitzrayim, which is Egypt. And then Jacob said to Joseph, "Bring them to me and I will bless them." Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age. So again, this is another clue that Jacob was not sick. Jacob was weak from old age. So strength-wise, he was an old man. Eyes-wise, he was dim. He can't see properly. So that he could not see. So the dimness of eyes, maybe cataract, maybe glaucoma, we don't know. But definitely at that point in time, there was no surgical procedure. So he couldn't see them. So Joseph brought them near to him, and then he kissed them and embraced them. And that would be a sign of adoption, if you want to call it that way, right? And Israel said to Joseph, "I had not thought to see your face." Why? Because Jacob thought that Joseph had died, and he was so miserable. But in fact, God has shown me your offspring. Now you need to understand the Oriental view of happiness and blessing. That the father, Jacob, could now see Joseph, could also now see Manasseh, as well as Ephraim. Which means that Jacob could see his grandchildren. And with his grandchildren, you know, in an Oriental family, that it is truly a blessing when an old man can see the chuchu-chichi, right? And that in itself represents a joy that is brought to Jacob. So when you read the Bible and you think about the Hebrew, you can actually more or less associate the Oriental way of life, particularly even the Chinese thinking, into the correlation with the Hebrew thinking. So this is a paragraph that describes the joy of an old man, because God has shown me your offspring, my grandchildren. Okay? Now, we need to spend some time in this passage here, which we need to draw a little bit. In verse 12, remember, Jacob had managed to sit up in his bed, met up with Joseph, and now the two little kids, okay, I'll call them kids, Joseph's children, right? Manasseh and Ephraim. And so Joseph brought them from beside his knee, and he bowed down his face to the earth. This is, well, in typical English language, you will call it worship, right? He bowed down with his face to the ground. That is worship, right? Earth here is not earth as in third rock from the sun. This is the Adamah. So you notice that whenever you find somebody who is greater than you, you will bow down in obedience. It's a sign of honor, right? So Joseph paid tribute to Jacob because it is now a time of blessing. Now verse 13. Joseph took them both, Ephraim with his right hand towards Israel's left hand, and Manasseh with his left hand towards Israel's right hand. Now, this is where I need to draw this to you. First of all, we have the chair. Okay? The chair is very interesting. So you have a little couch. And the first person that we are talking about is Jacob. Okay? So this is Jacob. And then you have Joseph. And with this, you will find two kids. These two kids will be representing Manasseh as well as Ephraim. So if this is Joseph, then you would read them that Ephraim would be his right hand towards Israel's left hand. Okay? And this would be Joseph's right hand, Joseph's left hand. And we should be able to draw this as Jacob's right side and left side. And so the Joseph's right hand would be Ephraim. And Joseph's left hand would be Manasseh. Okay? Now with this, we now read the next segment. The next segment says this: Then Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, guiding his hands knowingly, for Manasseh was the firstborn. What does it mean, guiding his hands knowingly, like this? This means intentional. It is not by accident. Now, so let me show you what that means. It means that Jacob's right hand was on Ephraim. Jacob's right hand would mean this. His right hand would be on Ephraim. His left hand would be on Manasseh. Okay, so this is a very important concept that we need to know. Right hand. So the first thing I've shown you in this chart here is that Jacob literally crossed his hands. The right hand on Ephraim, the left hand on Manasseh. And because it says he guides his hand knowingly, this is intentional. But I have circled this word, right hand, because in the Hebrew context, the right hand is the hand of authority. The right hand is the hand of power. The right hand is the hand that directs. The right hand is the hand that proclaims. And so when you do a blessing, the right hand would be the priority hand, the hand of precedence, the hand that will give the foremost blessing. Do you see where the challenge is? Well, the challenge is very clear that Jacob intentionally put his right hand on Ephraim with the intention of blessing him first, although Manasseh was the firstborn. Traditionally, the firstborn always receives the first blessing, the primary blessing. As you recall, at the time of Jacob and Esau, that Jacob had cheated Esau of the father's first blessing. And so now Jacob is now intentionally blessing Ephraim, the younger. Okay? So this one, you have to be very clear that Jacob crossed his hand. The first thing Jacob did was to bless Joseph. And he said, God, El Shaddai, whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked. And you must understand, throughout from chapter 12 of Genesis onwards, walking is very important. Walk here, walk there, walk to the place that I will show you. Because walk is a verb that is very vivid. It's action-oriented. It's intentional. You have to do it. And walk literally means walking before God, walking a journey. Our life is a journey that we walk. And so walk has an equivalent modern English meaning as live. But live is a very abstract term because you could sit and do nothing and you are living. And so the Old Testament, especially in the book of Genesis, is filled with this particular word, walk. So walk would mean to live, walk would mean to journey, walk would mean to go a certain distance and conduct your life. You know, it has all these meaning. And so walk is important in the Hebrew concept. It is very visual. You can see it's very intentional. You must do. And so Abraham and Isaac walked before God. And so this is not about just living. They actually walk so that God can see where they go. And then he talked about himself, who has fed me all my life long to this day in Mitzrayim. And so now we have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that's where we get the triad of names. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Because this is the last part. We're in chapter 48. And we are now introduced to the God of the fathers. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Verse 16. The angel who has redeemed me from all evil. The angel of the Lord, whom he had a wrestling match with, and that the angel blessed him with a new name called Israel. And he went before him and redeemed him from all evil. What is this evil? Remember, every time you read the word evil, don't think of it as a moral bad. This would be whatever in the eyes of Jacob is not working out right. And this has to do with Esau. With Esau. Because the angel of the Lord gave him a new name on his way to meet Esau. And there was a redemption because Esau and him embraced and made up and reconciled. Next, bless the lads, bless these young, the youth. And so this is Manasseh and Ephraim. Let my name be upon them, which means that Manasseh and Ephraim's father would not only be Joseph, it would also be Jacob. And the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth, which means that with Reuben, with Simeon, with Yehudah, with Levi, then Manasseh and Ephraim will be counted as one of them. So whenever you mention Israel or Jacob, Manasseh and Ephraim will be counted as part of the 12. That is what this means. So suddenly you find that the grandsons, Manasseh and Ephraim, has been elevated to become the direct descendants of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, Joseph, when he saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. Why? Because that's the wrong thing to do. Why is it the wrong thing to do? Because in the blessing, you always bless the firstborn. That's why Joseph was upset. It displeased him. So he took hold of his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. What hand? Right hand. It's not just any hand. So remember, in the Hebrew context, the right hand is a hand of power, it's a hand of blessing. And Joseph said to his father, "Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." Notice, right hand on the firstborn. That would be the Hebrew culture. And so Joseph thought that his father was old, maybe just not his eyesight, maybe his was a bit dull in the head as well. In our last segment, verse 19, his father Jacob refused. Now this is important for us to know. What does refuse actually mean? Refuse means he rejected Joseph's suggestion. He says, "I know, my son, I know." This is so important. The word yada is no. We read of it in Genesis chapter 4, and Adam knew Eve. The word no is also a very intentional verb. It appears in the Hebrew Bible thousands of times, and it refers to discovering, to experience, to have knowledge of. And so Jacob told Joseph, "I know. Although my eyes is dim, I can see. I know who is who." And so he is saying that I am intentionally doing it. Manasseh also shall become a nation, and he shall be great, and we'll talk about great. But truly, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants, that is Ephraim, shall become a multitude of nations. Now you need to understand what this means. Number one, great and greater, gadol. What is great? Great would be important, right? So let me just write this down here. Great would be important. Great would also mean to be powerful. Great would also means to do great things. Great would also mean large in number. And so, your younger brother shall be great. I would suggest that he would be a nation of many people. But Ephraim will become a multitude of nations. And that would be an interesting idea. What do you mean by multitude of nations? It would be full of nations. Full. Lots of it. Overflowing with nations. Notice this word, nations, is in the plural. Not just one. So Ephraim does not represent one nation, whereas Manasseh will represent one people, one tribe, one nation. But Ephraim will be many, many nations. Now later on, at the time after Solomon, when the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom appeared, and the southern kingdom would be Judah, the northern kingdom would be Israel, we also find another name for the northern kingdom, and it is Ephraim. The capital of the northern kingdom is in Samaria, and is in Ephraim. And so God would use Ephraim as the focal point of all the northern tribes. And when they are dispersed, they are all known as Ephraim, which now the multitude of nations, are full of nations, will become true after they are dispersed by Assyria. Now, what you can see now is that this seems to be a prophecy. It's a prophetic blessing. So he blessed them that day. He blessed Ephraim and Manasseh. So that's why we keep saying Ephraim and Manasseh. Why does that matter? Well, we need to understand that Jacob, or Israel, blessed Ephraim, the younger of the two, in a greater sense than Manasseh. And so in the order of description, it has now become Ephraim and Manasseh, not Manasseh and Ephraim. And thus he set Ephraim before Manasseh, and that would be ahead. Now in the Hebrew culture, it's a no-no. Why? Because Manasseh is the firstborn. But Jacob is adamant. By you. Who is you? Ephraim, right? Israel as a nation will be blessed, saying, may God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh, and thus set Ephraim ahead of Manasseh. Verse 21, as we close, Israel said to Joseph, behold, I am dying. So again, our third clue that Jacob is not sick. He is weak from old age. But God will be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers. So even when Jacob was giving this next prophecy, bring you back, that would be you and your descendants. And after you die in Egypt, you also will be brought back to the land of your fathers. What is that land of your fathers? That is the land that God promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the land of Canaan. Verse 22, moreover, I have given to you. Who is you? Joseph, one portion above your brothers. What do you mean by one portion above your brothers? Verse 22. The word portion here literally means one shoulder, right? One shoulder. What is one shoulder? And so this word is shoulder. And the English is translating as portion, above your brothers. So if your brothers had one share, then Joseph will have 2 shares. That's what it means by one portion above your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and my bow. This is another prophecy. This is a prophecy, and if you look at Israel, this will be the Dead Sea. So I will show you that. Okay, maybe not the Dead Sea. This will be Galilee, and this will be the Jordan. Okay, this is Galilee. So what we find would be anywhere on this side. This is the Amorite land. And we will find that God in the future, in the inheritance, they would first fight for this land before they enter into the promised land. And this land was fought when Moses was around. And when they fought for this land, and we read it in the last parts of Numbers, that piece of land was given to Manasseh. And Manasseh had one piece here, and Manasseh had one piece here. And so we term this land as East Manasseh, right? East and West Manasseh. And so Manasseh has one more than everybody else. And that's what it means. This is prophetic because it hasn't happened yet. It will happen a few hundred years down the road. We are now at the time of Jacob in the land of Egypt. That would be shortly after Abraham, Isaac, and now Jacob. And the promise was given in Genesis chapter 15. And we would see this happening in the book of Joshua. And so what we can tell is this blessing in chapter 48 to Ephraim and Manasseh is prophetic. This is the end of chapter 48. Any questions?
Pastor, with Manasseh and Ephraim, we will have 14 tribes. But I'm interested to know Joseph's wife. She's the daughter of priest. So is that priest a Levite?
No. The priest is from Mitzrayim, is an Egyptian. So you need to understand in the tribal and nationhood, tribes always follow the father, never the mother. Right? Tribes follow the father. The mother will be a reference to the nation. And so this problem comes only in the book of Joshua and follow on. Because when they were all given the inheritance, they were afraid of intermarriage, because they were afraid that if the daughters married the sons of other tribes, then the land will be getting smaller because the daughters married out. So you need to understand the Hebrew concept of the daughter marries to the son, right? And so it's very, very Chinese. And so it follows the man. And so they were very afraid that they will get smaller and smaller portions. So God was instructing them, number one, the sons are the only ones who will inherit the land, not the daughters. And so the daughters, when they are free to marry across all the 12 tribes, the land will never grow smaller. And they will also never grow bigger. It will be the same size as God has originally given them as inheritance. So Manasseh and Ephraim have their father, who is Joseph, and they will represent the father in the 14. So they don't represent the mother, because the mother never inherits. So no problem with that.
And here Jacob actually never reject Joseph's wife, who is not from their own people.
Yes, which is fine. In fact, you remember Abraham married Sarah's handmaid, an Egyptian, Hagar, right? And God blessed her as well, and Ishmael.
Okay, then here we now have 14 tribes. But actually, when we talk about the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, all in, we only have 12 tribes. How to explain that?
Okay, just very briefly, let me just show you how this works. Jacob has 12 sons, right? 2 of the sons are of importance. One is Joseph. And Joseph now has 2 sons, right? Ephraim and Manasseh. And then we have another son that we only know of later on in the book of Exodus. And that son would be Levi. So in the inheritance, Jacob doesn't know that there should only be 12. But Jacob, in his wisdom, as God has inspired him, says this: I am now adopting Manasseh and Ephraim plus 2. That's why we have 14, right? And Jacob has also told Joseph that you will not be part of the inheritance. Instead, Ephraim and Manasseh will be part of that. And that makes 13. And so when we come to the book of Exodus, God says, Levi or Levi, you also will not inherit. And so we're now back to 12. And for the purpose of inheritance, we have the 12. For the purpose of tribes, we have the original 12. So you notice that we tend to get sometimes confused by which 12 are we talking about? And it has to do with the context. If we talk about the 12 sons of Jacob, we have the original 12, with Joseph and Benjamin being the youngest. Now, when we talk about the inheritance, then Joseph is not part of that, Then Ephraim and Manasseh is part of that. And then eventually we see Levi or Levi is not part. So there is 12 as well. And so that is where many of us sometimes get confused, because 12 is all over the place, but the names keep changing. So it really depends on the context. So always look at the context. What is the context trying to say? Okay?
Okay, thank you. Very clear.
All right. Okay. We have 2 more chapters to go, and we will be finishing chapters 49 and 50 in the next 2 weeks. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Pastor.